join me for the previous few sessions that we had today and yesterday. It's been an incredible journey so far. The talks that we've had were so important and so just absolutely fascinating to hear people's stories, their personal experiences of working in this field of, you know, dealing with life after death, either as mediums or doing the research that is to do with near-death experiences. And again, there's just been so much knowledge that has been shared and so much wisdom. So I hope you guys do stick around for the rest of the incredible interviews that we have lined up. And please do share this information. Please do share these videos, because it's so important that everyone gets a chance to see them. You know, it's sometimes it can be just the most simple of things, such as just sharing this one link to someone and with someone that you know, and it can really make a difference to them. So I hope that you do manage to support my channel and also all the guests that have been on here so far, and also all the guests who will be today and tomorrow as well. So today we'll be continuing our talk about communicating with, well, really what happens during the transition of death. So yesterday we went a little bit into the death and anxiety and the whole problem around, especially our Western society, that it has to do with this fear of death, this anxiety around death, which is really, it's time for us to address it. And today we're speaking a little bit more about the actual process, what actually happens during this transition from life to death, which is such an incredible topic, and again something that deserves to be spoken about, so that people really do see that there's actually nothing to fear. There is again, there's so much help for us on the other side, on this side, so we have a lot of support from every single perspective that we can think of. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my guests today. My first guest is Julie Ryan. She is a psychic. She's a psychic and a medical intuitive, and has been for over 25 years. She started off as an inventor and an entrepreneur, inventing a number of globally used surgical devices, and she found 9 companies across the medical field and long-term industries. She then settled into her talents as a psychic and an intuitive, going on to write her incredible books, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, and her second book, Angel Messages for Kids. Julie also has a fascinating podcast on her YouTube channel, Ask Julie Ryan, where every Thursday people from all over the world call in to ask Julie for help, whether it's to do with a medical issue or to contact their loved one who has passed over. Julie would normally really amazingly would scan them or communicate, establish contact with their loved one. And again, there's just so much incredible information that comes through from that. So I would definitely advise you guys, if you are interested in anything to do with this field, to join her Thursday sessions. And Julie also leads a online class where she teaches people how to develop their own psychic abilities, which again, having taken part in it, I can tell you that it's absolutely incredible, and it's really very easy to understand, and I can definitely recommend it for anyone who is interested in this field and developing their own psychic abilities a little bit more. So just to start off with Julie. Julie, welcome to my channel, and thank you so much for being here. How are you? How is everything with you? And how have you found especially this last month, which has been a little bit crazy?
I'm wonderful, and I'm so proud of you for doing this summit, because to your point, I think religions and cultures have bastardized what happens when we die, and people are so afraid. And so there's really a glorious component to it about how we're surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones, and even the spirits of deceased pets. And so, as you know, because you're a graduate of my Angelic Attendant Training class, and I'm so proud that you joined us in that, you learn that really there is a glorious component to the dying process. And what a perfect time for us to be discussing this in this global pandemic situation that we all find ourselves in. I think it's really important for everybody to remember that we're spirits attached to a body having a human experience. Most of us know that or have heard it. probably multiple times. But I think it's equally as important to remember that our spirit chooses when we go, where we go, who's with us when we go, and what the circumstances are. And I find that when people really understand that part of the equation, it brings them enormous comfort, because so many people find themselves in a situation where they're filled with guilt or remorse because they weren't with grandma when grandma passed. Well, grandma was in a nursing home or an elderly care facility and wasn't able to have visitors. Well, that was out of their control. But when they understand grandma chose to go this way, even if it was from COVID or from some situation where some other comorbidity issue or issues was triggered because of COVID, that's how grandma decided to leave. And it's all grandma's prerogative to decide, again, when we go, how we go, and where we go. So I'm really not enjoying, but I'm finding this time fascinating, because I think people are really turning to a spiritual side of the equation to try and find some meaning to what's going on here. And regardless of how they get there, how wonderful for them if they do develop their spirituality and their, you know, their abilities to be intuitive, telepathic, psychic. We're all born with the software. We all come in with the software. Everybody can do this work. It's just a matter of developing and enhancing it once you realize that you've got all the abilities already inside. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, as always, as all of our previous interviews, it's just, again, so much important wisdom is shared, and you've been in the industry for such a long time, so I know there's so much that you can share with people that they will find helpful and comforting as well. So just to know that. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And okay, right, I'm just gonna introduce my second guest, an incredible David Oliver that I've also had previously on my channel, if you guys remember from last year. And just to tell you a little bit about David, he is a naturally empathic psychic medium and a Reiki master and teacher. From the age of 18, David was introduced to a Reiki, which really got him interested in the whole field and in spirituality as a whole. So this enhanced his own empathic abilities and sparked a huge interest in other aspects of spirituality. And then from then, David went on to practice meditation and mediumship. And since then, he has worked at various spiritual venues across and events across the West Midlands. And he now has his own practice called Do Holistic, which Do Therapies. Was it Do Therapies? Sorry. Yep. Do Therapies, yes, where he now helps people to improve their well-being, creating positive states of being, positive states of mind, and also changing any negative beliefs or habits using Reiki and NLP. So if you guys would like to get in touch or find out more about his work, feel free to contact him on Do Therapies on Facebook. Right, David, thank you so much for being here again and for joining me on this this event. Again, tell me a little bit about how you have seen this whole year transition, and how has it been like for you so far?
It's been difficult because of the general panic that a lot of people have felt at the start of the year when it started unfolding. But I've also seen a lot of people starting new groups of various teachings regarding holistic and therapeutic and also spiritual practices, with a lot of different aspects, mostly relating to understanding what it's like to be spiritual. A lot of people at the moment are, how do I be spiritual, is the question they're asking. And it's like, when you've been practicing spiritual things, it's not necessarily, you don't just become spiritual. We're all spiritual in our own way, but as has been said, a lot of people are waking up to things. A lot of people are realizing that there's a lot more to life than the normal black and white material world that we've been living in. And it's been interesting for me to see people having an awareness of spirituality, and then some indulging in it in quite a strong way and learning a lot. I've seen groups that I've been involved in of people that have had an idea that they might know something but wanted to develop it. And especially over the last couple of months, as things have got into more of a stronger energy, a lot of people are suddenly achieving things that they were struggling with before, but because they're putting that practice in and they have the right support, it's amplifying their abilities and their confidence, and it's leading them to learn things for themselves as well as have people help them. They're also having their own experiences which are giving them enlightenment and knowledge in the subject, and it's really interesting to see how many people have suddenly just accepted that these things exist and want to indulge in them. And I mean, there's spiritual practices going on all over the world. You know, in some Asian countries, it's been an established part of their culture for a long time. And over in Britain, it hasn't necessarily been indulged in so much, but it's beginning to grow, and it's beginning to become less of a niche thing and more of a generally understood thing. And like you said, a lot of people are looking for some kind of understanding of what's going on. And the way that I've been looking at it is we've got a lot of challenges, but there's also been a lot of understanding that things that were indulged in a lot before, a lot of material things, a lot of going out, going out on a Saturday night to go and drink. People aren't necessarily doing so much because we can't, but they're realizing that we're wasting time and energy on things that don't really help us, but we've got used to doing because we needed to relax. But people are learning that you can just sit and meditate and relax for free. All you have to do is sit and get into that zone rather than look for outside things to get that pleasure or that kind of relaxation situation. And there's nothing wrong with going out and having fun, but I think it's helping people realize their own abilities that they can do themselves rather than having to rely on other things to help them get into that space.
Oh yes, totally. Yeah, we don't have to use drugs and alcohol anymore to get us into a happy state. You can just use it.
And people are missing just being able to have face-to-face conversations, something that we used to take for granted. And then when we do have that chance, I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more appreciative of what they can do with the freedoms that they're offered, within the limits of what's going on at the moment. But it's hopefully going to make people a lot more sensitive to each other's needs as well. And a lot more kind of caring for each other. And I'm seeing that growing in things that I'm involved in and other things that I'm seeing that are developing with regarding helping people just with their mental health conditions. Because, people who've had mental health conditions that have needed help with, but now it's under the spotlight. It's growing a lot more. And alongside that is coming many spiritual aspects of life as well, which is helping people find the peace or the stability that they need and opening them up to positive experiences that they might not have even considered before.
Yeah, which is a really positive aspect of
absolutely
everything that's happened in a way. No, I completely agree. And have you seen just from kind of the people who are around you or with your own clients, has there been a bit of a decrease in the fear around death, with, of course, with us being exposed so much to it? I guess now in a way people have just become used to it, it's like, but at the same time they still think of it as this unknown space that you're going into, and
to be honest, a lot of it that I've seen has been more about enjoying life, of not necessarily worrying about the situation that's coming ahead and enjoying what's going on there and then, and getting the enjoyment out of the experiences that they're having, and being a lot less anxious about things that they necessarily not needed to worry about but have done because they've been told they need to be stressed about it, when now they're like, oh no, it's fine, I've got what's going on in front of me is good. And a lot of people are talking about the dangers of what's going on, but it's also making people more careful in how they act as well, which is a positive thing as well, because people are a lot more self-aware of what's going on. With regards to the aspect of passing on, I think a lot of people are more concerned about their keeping the longevity of their life, becoming a lot more healthier, like I said, with not drinking, and also the diets they choose, relaxing in general, so they're not so stressed and so anxious, and quickening their heartbeat, and generally just trying to make the most of what's going on and stopping and thinking about what life actually means to them as well. And making the most of being able to care for people. I've seen people who didn't necessarily go out of their way to help people when they weren't having to stop and think about it. But now a lot of people are getting involved with charitable situations, or just offering people the option to talk to them and creating communities that didn't really exist before.
Oh, wow.
So I think with regards to the dying aspect of it, I've been lucky to not know of anybody that's become ill or died from it. I know a lot of people have, and like you said, a lot of people are just becoming more accepting of it, not in a inviting way. No one wants to be happy that people are passing away, but people are accepting that it is a fact, and it's a horrible, hard fact sometimes, but it is part of life. So like I said, I think people are they're realizing their mortality, so they're trying to make the most of the time they have left. And
so
doing the most of it.
it's kind of like being more in the present moment and just focusing on being in the present moment and not really trying to plan so much ahead, because everything is so uncertain in a way, isn't it? So
yeah, and it's taken away a lot of the hype of things that didn't really mean a lot, but were given a lot of attention, and now people are just having to look at the basic things like food and water and shelter, and having the things that we need to live, and anything on top of that is an added bonus at the moment. And when we have those bonuses, we really enjoy them, because we're realizing how sacred some things are that we didn't necessarily look at that way before.
Oh wow, yeah, really well put. Yeah, thank you for showing that. I completely agree, and I've definitely seen that in my own life, and kind of just really appreciating the small things and trying to be a lot more healthier now. All of a sudden we have this explosion of people wanting to be healthy and fit, which is good. Which is
it's
really
a shame it's had to go that way, but it is making people have those experiences, and that's the best thing you can take out of it. It is not necessarily just spiritually, but practically as well. It's making people realize a lot of the wastage in the world, a lot of the things to do with human politics, pollution, race. A lot of things are bubbling to the surface that didn't necessarily have room before, and that's what I'm looking at, because it's leaving that space. Things are able to be seen or made aware of, and we can hopefully start working on making those better, so everyone's life is generally more pleasant, because that should be what the biggest aim is, to enjoy what we're doing, because if we have our health and we have the ability to do stuff, we should make the most of it. I mean, you have to be aware that we're going to pass away, but not necessarily fret about that so much that we put ourselves into negative situations. I mean, don't be ignorant to it, but don't make that the focus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And no, thank you for sharing that. I totally agree with that. And Julie, what has been your experience of kind of 2020, and have you seen people gain, I guess, more awareness in terms of, okay, I'm a bit more open in terms of exploring the whole afterlife thing, and whether the spiritual aspects of death? Have you seen that in your own work?
I have, and I agree with everything that David said. And I think it's fascinating. You're in Spain, Desi. David's in Birmingham, England, and I'm in Birmingham. That's how they say it here, Alabama, in the U.S. And we all are seeing the same thing around the country, around the world, in our own countries, and then also around the world. And I find that people normally are interested in communication with spirit, even if they're linear thinkers and I'm a businesswoman and an inventor who learned how to do woo-woo, is what I tell people. And I'm a buffet of psychicness. And now I teach people all over the world how to do this. And once you're able to communicate with spirit, you can take it anywhere you want. You can do medical scanning and energy healing. You can talk to your dead grandma. You can scan your cat. You can tell how close to death somebody is. You can do past life stuff. You can communicate with spirit guides and angels. I mean, it's just all the same stream of spirit once you tap into it, and once you know how to validate the information that you get. It's just endless. And I find that people are more open about being interested in this. In the past, it used to be where, well, somebody would say something like, well, you have to prove it to me. I don't know that I believe this. And I'll say, well, really, I don't. have to prove it to you. If you're interested, fine. I'm happy to talk to you about it. If you're not, we can talk about the latest, car or the weather or whatever you'd like.
Yeah.
And then when I do that, then invariably they'll say something like, well, okay, let's talk about this. And so to your point, David, I think that people are more comfortable because of we're hearing about these deaths that from the COVID, and they're more interested in, regardless of how somebody died, being able to communicate with that loved one, especially if they weren't able to be with them before they died because they were in a quarantine situation or perhaps in an elder person's home. And so, yes, I find that it's definitely increased people's curiosity.
Mhm.
And my books, Angel Messages for Kids, and my new one's coming out next week. It's called Angel Messages for Dogs. And they're children's picture books, and they're just darling. But those are really helping. I'm hearing from moms all over the world telling me how it's really helping their children process what they're surrounded by, even if they don't feel like their child is paying attention. They're listening to their parents' conversations with others. They're listening to other adults' conversations. They know they're home from school. They're listening to the news and the death numbers and the COVID cases numbers and things like that. And it's frightening to them because they don't have any frame of reference. And these books talk about how spirit can communicate with them. Most little children have the ability to communicate with spirit, and they shut it down at the age of about 7 or 8, usually because an adult has told them, oh, honey, that's just your imagination. That's not really real. And so it validates the information they're getting, which helps bring comfort to them. So yes, I agree with everything David has said. Ditto, David, from the other Birmingham.
From both Birminghams.
But when we got started, I was laughing. I told David before we started going live, I said, David, you win because you guys been saying the word a lot longer than we have in the US. the pronunciation.
Yeah. Oh, well, again, what a coincidence. It's funny. I found that with doing these sessions, somehow the people that I put together, they do have so many similarities. There's some weird coincidences between them. So it's interesting how it works, even just putting these together. So yeah, very fascinating. But yeah, okay, let's move on to mediumship and communicating with spirit. First, let's start with how do you guys get prepared for communicating with spirit? Because, of course, each psychic or medium, they have their own rituals or, ways of doing that. What are your ways of doing this? And is this something that varies from person to person, or is it something that's quite, there's like something that's the same, similar for every person, every medium that communicates? David, how do you communicate with spirit?
Well, the process that I've been mostly shown is to begin with to put up energy to protect yourself, because when you're opening yourself up to spirit, it's been described to me like you're a lighthouse. As soon as you open up that communication, you may have things that you intend to communicate with, but any spirit that sees you that may have that chance to communicate through you, or use your energy for their own needs or gains, may become attracted to you and want to do that. So the first thing before you really open yourself up is to visualize. I'm told to visualize a golden 7-layered kind of egg dome shape around me, which really enhances that understanding that I'm safe in my space and that nothing that untoward or damaging can potentially affect me. And this is just it's like I describe it as similar as like wearing like a helmet on a bike, or basically anything that keeps you safe. It doesn't necessarily it's going to happen, but it's better to have it in place so you have that reassurance that you're going to be as safe as possible. And then once I've done that, then I focus on my chakras. I start with my root chakra. I imagine it sending roots down through my feet into the ground, all the way through the ground to the core of the earth, to really feel like I'm anchored and connected with the earth that I'm on. Then I move up to the sacral chakra, open that up, spread the energy, move up to the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the third eye, and then finally the crown. And I imagine, I see it as like a flower kind of twisting, unfurling, and opening up. And then doing this opens your sensitivity to energy on those levels around you. And then I get it when I'm talking about it, I get it now. I get like a tingling sensation on my crown, which I take as there's some kind of energy or spirit communicating with me or wanting to link with me. And I get a lot of physical sensations. I get a lot of like tingles at my arms. Sometimes my hair stands on end if the energy is quite strong. And then I take a couple of deep breaths and I try and let my mind be as clear as possible, because it's been explained to me when you have spirit giving you information. I don't know about yourself, Julie, but I feel like it comes from above the top of, behind my head, and it kind of enters my head through there, comes through my brain and then to my mouth. And I try and obviously be aware of my situation, but I try not to overthink it, because if you overthink it, your thoughts can get in the way of the message that you're getting. And that can break the message up or distort it or stop it coming through as it should. So that's what you have to learn as a medium, even though you are relatively in control of your situation by putting yourself in that place. You're not the one doing the thinking or the talking, you're just the mouthpiece for it.
Yeah.
And then the first time I worked on stage, the person I had a reading for just seemed to shine a little bit clearer and brighter than everybody else. And that's how I knew who I was communicating with. And I gave them the message. And you try and create as much of a strong connection as you can. You try and encourage them to verbally say yes or no to like things that you're asking them, or if they can understand. And the more that you build up that energy, the easier the message flows. And then once you've given that message, the energy that's there just tends to fade away, because it's like it's had its moment, it's been released, and it's satisfied, and then the spirit has said what needs to be said, and then generally goes. And then sometimes you can have 2 or 3 at the same time. So in the back of your mind, they might be trying to talk to you. It's like, 3 people trying to talk to you, you can't make sense of it. So you have to go, can you just be patient, form a line, I will help you, but I need to have as clear a message from you so I can do my job effectively. So yeah, it's quite a lot of organizing, and with practice it becomes a bit more second nature, but to begin with it could be quite a lot, because a person might give you a message, but they might show you the whole situation about how they looked, how they died. Sometimes I get physical sensations, like if they've broken an arm, I'll feel it, or if they've had a heart attack, then I can feel a pain in my chest. And all these things I take as ways to give the evidence to the person I'm working for. So the more specific you can be, the more obvious it is that you do have the person that you say you have there, and the easier it is for them to accept. So yeah, it's a matter of using that technique to keep things clear, because when you're in front of a group of people, you've got to kind of keep them entertained and communicate, interacting with them whilst paying attention to what's going on as well. So yeah, it's a lot of discipline.
It's a lot of
multitasking. Yeah, you kind of have to relax, but also be on top of it at the same time. It's quite a skill to find that balance.
Oh wow, that's very interesting. Thank you for describing that. I think I always find it interesting how people communicate and receive the messages in different ways. So that's really interesting to hear.
It helps having physical things, because it means that, if someone had a broken leg, you say they had a broken leg, it's quite specific, so they can go, yes, that makes sense to me.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting how it comes through, and you can actually feel it and hear it, and well, Julie, I know I sort of know how you communicate with spirit and how you contact spirit, because I've trained with you, and so I know a few of those, but would you mind just going over them, and just how do you prepare for communication?
Sure. I like David, a lot of similarities. I was nodding my head a lot when you were talking about what you do. It's like driving a car. The first time you get in the car, you have to remember, okay, I have to put the key in, or now you push the button, and you got to remember to put your foot on the brake and all of that. But what I teach is everybody, to your point, Desi, everybody is going to receive information from spirit in a way that mimics how they learn. David, I heard Desi say you're an NLP expert. NLP is how we come in and how we learn. Are we visual? Are we auditory? Are we kinesthetic? That kind of thing. So I really don't focus on technique. I focus on the transfer of energy when I'm training my students. And it's how does it come in naturally for you? I am a visual learner. So information comes in visually for me. I get direct knowing, David, like you. It's just as in my head. I have thoughts that come in my head. I hear things, I feel things. What I find is once somebody taps into spirit, all these different modalities come in. But there's always going to be a primary way that people are going to receive information first. So like you, David, what I do is I teach my students to tap into the core of the earth and have energy shoot up through their body and come out through the top of their head like a geyser. And our heads are like big satellite dishes, and they receive and they transmit frequencies. And every spirit has their own frequency, like their radio station numbers. You know, you're listening to classic rock on 102.5 and you're listening to talk radio on 97.2. Well, 102.5 might be David and 97.2 might be you, Desi. But I find that every spirit keeps that same frequency throughout all their lifetimes. And thoughts don't originate in our heads either. We pull them in from the ethers, and every thought has its own frequency as well and is broadcast on a channel that is along the lines of those thoughts. So in order to communicate with somebody, all you have to do is think of them. And in an instant, you're connected with their frequency. You know, there you've turned to their radio station. And it's as simple as just asking a question. Like you, David, what I find is that when we prime the pump, like we ask several questions, then the spirit gets really chatty and they've got lots to tell us. Normally when I'm communicating with spirit with a client, I will envision the client and they'll say, well, who do you see around me? I'll say, well, there's tons of spirits around you. Who do you want to talk to? Let's just cut to the chase. Let's go. I mean, who do you want to talk to? And we think of them and then we pull in their energy. So we prime the pump with asking a few questions, and then they get very chatty. And I agree with you, David. Sometimes it'll be their deceased mother and a couple of grandmothers and maybe a grandfather, and you know, maybe animal spirits will show up, and that's fun too, to talk with all of them. But it's just like having a conversation with people in a room. You know, you say something to them, they're going to answer. Everybody can communicate with spirit. You think of the person who's deceased, whether it's someone you knew or not. I mean, you want to talk to your deceased loved one, or you want to talk to Aristotle, you want to talk to Mother Teresa. Who do you want to talk to? It doesn't matter. We're all spirits. And so you think of that person, you're connected to their frequency, you say something to them, and the answer is going to come in within a second, as fast as you can snap your fingers. If you think about it for more than a second, that's going to be your brain talking to you. The other thing I find with spirit is super literal. So you want to be very concise and precise if you're looking for guidance, because we're always going to interpret what spirit tells us through our own frame of reference. And how applicable the information that we receive is going to be predicated on how we ask the question. For instance, if we say, Grandma, are we going to enjoy the movie? And you hear a yes, and you're like, oh, great. We're going to watch this movie tonight. And you're watching this movie with your family tonight, and it's atrocious. And you're thinking, Grandma, what's up with that? Why did you tell us we'd enjoy the movie? Well, Spirit's always going to give you a correct answer, but Grandma gave you a correct answer, and how you asked the question could pertain to any movie you watch for the rest of your life. Versus if you say, Grandma, are we going to enjoy watching Frozen 2 on Disney Plus tonight? See how specific that is? So when you're looking for guidance, or you're looking for an answer to something that's really important to you, be sure and be very specific and drill down on it. Ask a question, get an answer, make it more specific, ask it a different way, especially if it's important. The other thing I find is the more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it. So practice it with stuff that doesn't matter. Am I going to enjoy this piece of chocolate cake more or this piece of orange cake more? Really, in the scope of your life, does it matter? Probably not, but you're going to get an answer, and then you're going to be able to go from there. So it's really fun. Everybody has the ability. You come in with the software, you just learn to develop it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Those are such good tips for anyone who wants to learn more about developing the psychic abilities. And it really is simple, you know, it's not kind of, you don't have to learn a whole science about it. It is very simple. It's just sometimes just tuning in and asking the questions and you know, trying not to think about it, which is hard. But yeah, definitely very interesting.
May I make one other point too?
Mm-hmm.
What I find is that we all come in with an internal GPS. And if we have an emotion that we're feeling that feels bad, it's based in fear, and it's our spirit saying, hey, you're out of alignment. Look at this from a different perspective. Spirit is never going to give you information that's bad or feels bad, ever. So if you feel bad when you're getting information from spirit, you're processing that through your frame of reference that's distorting what spirit is saying. Because all spirit is pure love and light. Spirit is never going to give you information that can be harmful or detrimental or damage anybody, ever. If you ever get something that feels like that or information like that, you are out of alignment with your own spirit. Get back in alignment, go back, redo the geyser from the core of the earth up through the top of your head, because spirit is always going to give you information that's at least either neutral or positive. And I think that's really important to remember.
Oh yes, definitely. And do you find that sometimes people who come to see you, they kind of expect, you know, certain people to show up in this kind of this false hope, you know, that do they have like a false hope? For example, I need to speak to grandma today, and you know, and there's this, sometimes maybe they're not available, maybe, you know, they in another dimension doing something else. I don't know. Do you ever find that it's
I've never experienced that, Desi. That's why I think people who've talked to a lot of psychics around the world, that's how a lot of psychics operate, is let's just see who's around you today and who wants to communicate with you. I'm a businesswoman, cut to the chase. Who do you want to talk to? We go there. You know, there has never been anybody in the 30 years I've done this where it's like we think of them and boom, they're right there. It's really that simple. So do you want to talk to multiple people? We can call them all in at once. We can talk to them one at a time. We can have a group chat. Like if you have a dinner party and you've got lots of people there, and then people will do that. I do that a lot with spirit guides. You know, we'll talk to, what I find is that most people have multiple spirit guides around them at any given time. Well, who do you want to talk to? Let's ask a question. Whoever's going to be advising you on whatever that topic is going to step forward, and then the others are going to join in the conversation. So again, I think it's a difference in technique. Our heads are satellite dishes. Who do you want to talk to? You think of them, boom, they're right there.
Yeah, wow, really interesting. And David, what about you? Do you find sometimes, you know, people kind of come to you with this, I need to speak to this person or that person, and do they normally kind of come through, or sometimes you know, how does that work with you?
Sometimes they come through. Sometimes you get someone that they weren't even expecting to want to communicate with them come through as well. And those situations are quite interesting, because the person you're trying to tell information to, there's a thing called psychic amnesia, where you could have someone that you are sure is there to speak to that person, and you can tell them all these things, and they just won't at the time accept what you're telling them, because they're just like, they can't put their finger on who it is. And you have to stay, you know, you have to stick with your guns and know that if you've got that person through, if you're sure that's who you've got, then you need to pass that information on. Because like I said, once you pass the information on from the medium's perspective, that energy dissipates and there isn't that kind of anxiety, that need to push it through. And then sometimes maybe hours or maybe days later, you'll find out that person might message you and go, I know who you mean now. And they can take what you've said and they go, don't understand why I couldn't say it at the time. And, you know, and it's really weird, because they obviously did know, but because I think it's like they're being kind of put on the spot as well. And in their head, they've decided, oh, I'm going to hear from grandma. And I think that sometimes the way I've been told is a spirit will come through to tell someone something if they need to know something. Because the way that I've been told it is because spirit aren't limited to what we can see, what's generally in front of us or be aware of, within our limits, because they aren't stuck in that. They can move wherever, and they can see all around us. They can see the past situation. They can see what's going to happen in the future. They can see other people involved that we might not be aware of their opinions or attitudes, and they can let us know this person thinks this or that for our benefit, because they have that ability to see it. And like us, the way I've been told is because they are not physical, they have to put the effort into coming to the medium to communicate with them. So the best way as a medium to make that connection as easy as possible is to expand our energy up towards them, so we can kind of meet in the middle. So they don't have to travel as far and use as much energy just to get to us. And the less energy they have to waste, the stronger the message that they'll be able to give us is, and the more information, because they have that capacity to pass it on. Rather than, it's like, if you have to walk 20 miles to give someone a message, then you're knackered. If you only have to walk 10 and they walk 10, then you might both kind of meet in the middle, and you've got that more strength, and it helps with the strength of the message. It helps with the clarity, and it also helps with the emotional side of things as well, because the more strength there is, the more you can, sometimes not just the words that you use, but the energy that you give out. Sometimes people can connect to that. They can feel the love of the frequency of the person that they've been getting the message from, and that intensifies the clarity of the message even more, makes them feel more at peace, because everybody wants a hug off their grandma. It's nice to speak to them, but if they can get close to something like that, it gives them that sense of kind of comfort and support that they may have been missing, and leaves them feeling more satisfied, or even that they've got more than they expected to get in the first place. And all these things, as when you're the person being focused on as a medium, all these things can really make a difference to how people perceive how good you are at being a medium. Because if you give them a bit of a message, then they might start linking, but then you might lose the link, and then they're kind of disappointed because they think you're so close to getting it. Or sometimes you might get someone that doesn't necessarily fully trust you, and then you'll blow their minds by giving them really specific details about something that they would only know themselves, and that really goes to show that you are getting what you claim to be getting, and put you in that position where people go, oh, they do know what they're talking about, and this is a real situation. And then suddenly you win them over, and once that bit of doubt's gone, you can find yourself, just the flow just explodes, and you can converse with them. And you have to be careful, because you can end up using a lot of your own energy, and then once you finish with one person, if you've got other people to work with, you need to remember to hold on to some of your own energy as well. So again, it's that matter of control of letting things flow, but knowing when the time is to stop. Because otherwise you could spend an hour giving that person a message, and everyone sat there going, well, what about me? And it's difficult, because you want to give that information, because you've got the opportunity, but at the same time, unless it's a one-to-one session, you can't make it all about that, because you've got a room full of however many people same, and you don't want to drain all your energy, because when you come to the next person, you might not be able to give a good message because you've used all your energy in that one, and then again you kind of fall flat. So it's an interesting process.
Yes, Julie? Yeah.
I have a fun story that just happened last week with a client, David, along the lines of when somebody comes in that they're not expecting. And it was a client, we were talking to, I believe, her grandmother, and she was giving her information about her daughter, who's grown and married and has little children of her own. And so grandma said, tell Susie, or whatever the granddaughter's name is, tell Susie, I'm so sorry that she lost her Nana. And to me, Nana is a grandmother. I'm thinking, Nana, grandmother. And her mother, my client, saying, well, no, her grandmother's been gone for a long time, and the spirit was communicating, I'm so sorry that she's grieving because she lost her Nana. So I said, well, she just keeps talking about this. She's so sorry that she lost her Nana. So then my client said, she gasped and she said, oh, I know who she's talking about. She said they just lost their dog and their dog's name was Phoebe, but they called the dog Nana Dog, like the Nana Dog in Peter Pan, because the dog was always with the kids and would slept in the kids' bedroom and stuff. And she said, that's who my grandmother's talking about, because they are grieving with the loss of their dog, whose nickname was Nana Dog. So, David, I just said, I thought of that fun example.
Yeah, it's a lovely story.
It takes to register, doesn't it, sometimes? And obviously, I guess it's, especially if you see a medium for the first time, and it's such mind-blowing information that your mind doesn't really register straight away what's actually happening. So it takes a while for the person to be like, oh yeah, that's what they were speaking about. Yeah, it's happened. I've been one of those annoying people when I've seen someone. So yeah. Also, David, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, when like I said, the first time when I did stage work and the person was clear of who I was giving a message to, once me and all the other people who were working, because it was everybody's kind of first stage work, we were asked by the people leading it, the two teachers, because two groups together, if anybody else had anything to say. And I said, well, I didn't have a specific message for anyone there and then, but I could see at the back of the room, the way that I see auras is like, it's like when you're looking through a glass of water, it's see-through, but you can tell there's a slight distortion. And I could see all of these outlines of people with the auras, but there was no bodies. And I said, I can see them all at the back of the room. And it was the spirit of families members that were there to kind of observe themselves. So they said, well, if you want, ask one of them to come forward if they've got anything to say. And I saw this one body separate from the group, walk down between the aisle down the seats until they were about 6-7 feet away from me. And then suddenly I saw an image of a grandma. She was like about 4 foot tall. She was tiny. And I saw her with her family. It was nearly Christmas time, so I think that was the kind of poignancy of the message. And I could see her because she was about the same height as all the kids. She was like their favorite gran. And then again, I saw the person who I needed to give the message to because they just seemed to shine out brighter. And I suddenly turned to them. I told them all these things. Like the grandma, she was so small, she like had to turn the sleeves on her dressing gown up because it was massive on her, and all these things. And the look of joy and the tears, but also, you know, the happiness she'd had that connection out of the blue. It really showed to me how spirit can work, and also proved to me, you know, how at the time I was kind of nervous because it's my first time, but because I kind of had that belief in myself, otherwise I wouldn't have been there, I suppose, that I could do it. And it was only a 5-minute interaction, but it was enough, and that really left me feeling good. And like, but also like we were saying about how you're not putting your energy into it. And it's really strange because after you've done the work, people are like, oh, that was great if it went well, you know, and you don't feel like, you know, you've been there, you don't really feel like you've actually done much because you haven't really mentally done much. You've just added your energy and helped be the vessel to give the message. And it's quite a weird experience after, because you just feel like you did when you started. You maybe a bit nervous, but you don't feel like a rush of adrenaline excitement because it hasn't really been that interactive with your physiology. It's been more about your brain. I you know what I mean? And you finish and then you just stay quite quiet and humble because you're not like celebrating because you know you've done a good job, but you know that it hasn't necessarily fully involved your full emotional range. Does that make sense? Because it's not you giving it.
Yeah, because you've been more of a channel, isn't it? You've just passed on that message, and no, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Yes, Julie.
I along to piggyback, David, on what you were talking about with spirit, they look like holograms to me. It sounds like they do to you as well. Anybody that's seen Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty. You know how the body turns into a hologram. But I think with us talking about life after death and all of that in this summit, it's important to talk about that those spirits are all with us as we're dying, through the dying process. I call it the 12 phases of transition.
Yes.
And And to your point, David, it's so comforting to the family when you can describe your little Nana who's 4 feet tall and she's wearing a sweater with pearl buttons that buttons up the front of, of her body. And she's got white hair and her hair's in a bun in the back of her head and that kind of thing. And we're all surrounded by deceased loved ones and angels and the spirits of deceased pets as we're transitioning, whether we die instantly, like in the case of a homicide or a suicide, or whether our dying process is stretched out over days, weeks, months. And to your point again, David, I think when we understand that our loved ones are with us a lot, and we can call them in at any time and communicate with them. It's so comforting. I use the example of, remember the old fashioned emergency room setups where they'd have a whole bunch of patients on a floor and they'd have curtains in between each patient. And when the doctor would come in, they'd pull the curtain. Well, if the curtain's open, you can see the patient who's in the bed next to you, right? So you know that they're there. Well, when the curtain is drawn, that you can't see that person, but that person is still there. And I think that's a good analogy of what spirit is. Spirit is still around us. Our loved ones are around us and we can communicate with them anytime. And we can communicate with spirit that's attached to a body. That's how I do all the medical intuitive work that I do. I connect my spirit to their spirit. And like you, David, it's like I have a big screen TV in my head, and I'm seeing X-rays and CT scans and things like that. But it's just a different form. It's the old, what we learned in grade school. Water can be in the form of a liquid. It can freeze into ice. It can turn into a gas. It's all the same thing. It's just different forms. And that's the same with spirit.
Yeah, I wanted to use an example of the only person that I've been really in the same situation as was when my grandmother was in the hospital. She broke her back, which led to her passing away. And we were in the hospital, and it was probably a couple of hours before she actually passed. But me and my partner, who's also aware of psychic energy and spirit, we both looked behind her bed and kind of slightly in a physical sense and in our mind's eye, we could see this gap opening. We could smell lavender, which was one of her favorite smells. And we knew that there was her family members who were in spirit waiting to take her away. And it was a bittersweet moment because in one way it was absolutely amazing to be aware of that. But at the same time, you know that she's getting ready to pass over. So you kind of know it's happening. And yeah, it was beautiful, but sad at the same time. And I think that's the interesting thing, like you're saying about, when people know their grandparents are around and stuff, it's great to know that they are around, but because people miss that physical touch and that interaction, that's why they kind of no, like they love they can have that, but it also makes them upset because it makes them realize how they're not physically there anymore. And that's the thing, when you're aware of spirit, it does kind of take away that massive gap that you feel because you're aware that their energy is still there, but it's just a shame that you can't physically hug them or interact them in that way, because we're used to, as human beings, doing how we do things in what people call the third dimension. But at the same time, it's great when you are aware of it to be able to communicate and to let other people know that, like you said, all we have to do is think of someone and they will be there. It's just if you increase your sensitivity to it, then you can be more aware of it and then you can enjoy the experience more rather than wondering if they're there.
Yes, totally. Yeah, that's really well put. Yes, Julie.
There's a book that was written by an MD PhD named Chris Kerr, Kerr, called Death is But a Dream. And in his book, he is the director of a very large hospice palliative care center in New York State. And he's done research, university-based research on a couple thousand patients. And he has found that close to 90% of them, I believe it's 88 point something percent of them, report seeing deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets as they're approaching death, either in the form of visits or in the form of dreams. And they talk about how comforting that is. In his book, validates what my book talks about from the spiritual side of the equation in the 12 phases of transition, what's happening as we're dying. And then his book validates all the stuff that I'm talking about that dates back to about the 5th century, as much as I could find in my research, to a Gregorian chant called In Paradisum that talks about the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise.
Yeah.
And I've been waiting for science to catch up with the woo-woo, and it has, because his book was published earlier this year. So I highly recommend anybody that's interested in knowing more, get Angelic Attendants for the spiritual side of the equation, and then get Death is But a Dream for the university research, that corroborates the information.
Yeah.
How sweet is that, David, that you were able to experience that with your grandmother? I love that. And I love that you were able to smell the lavender. Was that something that was? It was
shocking because like I said, me and my partner both there. We both looked at each other and we're like, we knew that we were having the same experience without having to say anything, but we were still surprised by it because it wasn't an experience we'd had before. And it was just, like I said, it wasn't a pleasant situation to be in, obviously,
right.
But knowing that her family were there to take her and we're going to look after her gave us a bit more comfort than we would have had otherwise. And it's strange because we left the room and then she had people coming to attend to her, and then when we went back in the room she'd passed. And another thing I really noticed is not necessarily the physical size but the energetic size of the person. You don't realize how much of a person's makeup is their soul and their life and their energy until it's gone, because she looked so much smaller. And it's strange, you can see the difference between a person who's got a soul in their life and when it's gone, because they just don't, you can tell they are just like a frame basically that had all this energy. It's like a deflated tire, it just goes. And it also leads on to the transition of how long it takes for a spirit to pass over, because a lot of people have different theories on it. Some people say it takes days, some people it can take even longer. I've known people who've worked as mediums who've said within an hour of them knowing a person's past, their spirit has come to see them and talk to them. And that's one of the interesting things, is people obviously, as a human having the experiences that we do, we try and put logic to things because that's how our brains work. And that's why these things that we're talking about, I'm glad we're able to now, because people with the science have turned them into logical explanations that everybody can agree with or understand. But I also think we don't necessarily always know everything about spirit, because I don't think we're going to be allowed to until we become spirit ourselves. And it's not necessarily that everybody's wrong, but I think that people put too much importance on having to know the facts. And I understand that we have, we trust science, we trust experience, and we trust research, which is fair enough. But sometimes, like I said, with that time when I had that lady come forward to me, that was completely illogical and, really out there. But I experienced it and I know it happened. And that's the interesting thing about this kind of stuff, is that from the beginning, people must have experienced spirit or seen ghosts and stuff, and wouldn't have been able to communicate with each other. But someone in one country sees a ghost, someone in another country sees a ghost. They're either both crazy or they're both right in what they're saying. And that's why I like now the fact that we can have these conversations. There's all time to have research to have been done. There's history of things repeating, and the more happens, the more you trust it. And I find it a very interesting time to be living in, where we have all this history and all this understanding, advancement in research, and this ability to talk about it internationally. And it does. I don't think everybody, said everybody can be spiritually linked and can work as a medium. I don't think everyone has to, but I think just that awareness is something that people should have, because it gives them the opportunity to understand things and answer questions. I think that's one of the hardest things when someone dies. Why did it happen? And people that don't get the logic that we put to it just feel completely lost because it's so out of the blue.
Yeah, and also to dissipate some of that fear that a lot of us seem to have around death, and really that actually
Yeah.
everything's okay. Which leads me on to well, the topic of actually today's discussion, which is what I named it after, was the transitional phase. I know we've hit the 1 hour mark. Do you guys have another 10-15 minutes to stay on, or do you have to
Yeah,
go?
I'm
Is
fine.
that okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I want to touch a little bit onto that, because I find the actual transition in itself really fascinating, really from what happens until the person soul is in their body until after it leaves their body. And Julie, I know you speak a lot about that in your own work. So you call it the 12 phases of transition. Would you mind explaining for everyone what they involve a little bit, and yeah, kind of how you see things from your own perspective? Mm-hmm.
Certainly. And David, to piggyback on your story about your grandmother, when she passed, and you said that after she had passed, that her body just seemed like a frame, and it seemed like she was more diminished. That piggybacks on what I see in my mind's eye with working with, gosh, countless families and people who've lost a loved one at the time of their passing, as they're leading up to their passing. What I was taught as a child was that the spirit or the soul is someplace in the chest, like in the upper chest area. And what I perceive, and perhaps you do too, David, is that the spirit is the main part of us, and the body is inside the spirit. It's all holographic, but the body is inside the spirit. So as somebody is dying, what I perceive is that the spirit exits through the top of the head. I think that correlates with what people with near-death experiences talk about, that they go through a tunnel. But what I perceive is that the spirit hangs on to the top of the person's head like a cartoon caption bubble. If you're looking at a cartoon where the words are or the character's thoughts are. And then what happens through the 12 phases of transition is the person who's dying, the closest female relative, their spirit shows up. So for instance, my mother's deceased. If I was dying, it would be my mother. If my mother was still alive, it would be my maternal grandmother. It's always on the maternal line. And in the case of adoption, it's always the mom who raised a person. The birth mother participates, but it's always the mom who raised the person who's running the show from the spirit world. And then the closest paternal spirit shows up always on the maternal side. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if my dad was still alive, it would be my maternal grandfather's spirit that would show up. And they are at the person who's dying, the patient's feet. Let's call the person who's dying the patient. Mm-hmm. And then the mother spirit, the maternal spirit, is the one that really runs the show from the spirit world. We moms think we're done with our kids once they're raised. No, we're still running things from from beyond the grave. Mm-hmm. And so they bring in angels, and there's a circle of angels that surrounds the person who's dying, with the parents anchoring. And these are angels that appear to me like big, 6 feet, 7 feet tall, big wings, white gown, long flowing locks to their shoulders and all that, belted at the waist with a rope. Is that what angels really look like? That's what they look like to me, because I went through Catholic schools for 12 years. That's what the statues look like. That's what the paintings look like. That's my frame of reference. Mm-hmm. Certainly somebody who was raised in a different culture, perhaps in an indigenous tribe in the Amazon, they might see angels as a ball of purple energy or something. But again, we're going to interpret things through our frame of reference. Yeah. And then as the person approaches death, that circle opens up into a horseshoe and eventually into a straight line at their feet. In the meantime, many, many spirits of deceased loved ones through all of their lifetimes, and the spirits of deceased pets show up as well. And to your point, David, when I'm describing, what these spirits look like, well, there's a collie here, there's a tabby cat, sometimes I can tell if somebody has grown up on a farm, because there'll be horses and chicks and ducks and pigs and, other farm animals that are there. And then about phase 9, there are angels that have shown up midway on either side of the spirit bubble, and their wings start to move on phase 9. And it reminds me of a giant owl. You know how a giant owl, if you've ever seen a movie about it, you can almost feel the drag. It's like a slow rhythmic silent movement. And that movement creates a vortex above the person's head. Imagine a funnel cloud like a tornado. And that's what helps the spirit and the body separate. And then at phase 12, when somebody actually departs, when their spirit departs, they're escorted by angels. And it's always up and to the right as I perceive it. So there are graphics in my book, Angelic Attendants. I talk about it a lot, and lots of stories with families with whom I've worked. But you can also see these graphics on my website, askjulieryan.com. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll send families or clients who have a loved one who's dying, I'll send them a copy of this chart. And it's so comforting to the family because they know that their loved ones surrounded by angels. They know their loved ones surrounded by their deceased pets and their family members. And it just brings a tremendous amount of comfort to the equation. And it goes back into that prayer I talked about earlier, the 5th century Gregorian chant in Paradisum. The angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. So to your point, David, I believe that people since the beginning of time have been able to perceive these things. And as we've become more well-educated and more scientifically and proof-based, perhaps in the past 100, 150 years, we've become less likely to pay attention to our intuitive abilities to witness this. But people since the beginning of time have been able to.
Yeah.
So that's what I perceive.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Julie. That's so, it's so interesting. Whenever I hear you talk about it, it's always so nice to have an actual visual image of what's happening around the person. And like you said, it's so comforting for people who are still, for their relatives to know that they're actually surrounded by angels and their loved ones on the other side. So,
well, and that nobody ever dies alone, ever. I have several clients who have really struggled with the fact that a loved one died and they didn't find that person till a couple of days later. And they said, oh, but they died alone and nobody should have to do that. Nobody dies alone. We're all surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones. The other thing I think is important to remember is time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time is a human creation. It's a human concoction. And to your point, David, it's hard for us to wrap our human minds around the fact that time doesn't exist because we don't have any frame of reference for that. And I completely agree with you that we want to know things because it helps us feel safe, but our human minds don't have the capacity to be able to comprehend things that we don't have a frame of reference to compare
That's why
with.
the images that you talked about in your book and on the website give people that sense of understanding because it's something they can see and interact with and takes away that doubt or that unknowing, which adds to the distress of losing a loved one. Right. So just being able to see something and, people, I assume most people know they see an angel, they know what it is without having to be described because they get that sense of, angels are seen to be caring and they're the messengers of God, aren't they? So the fact that they know that they're in good hands lessens the blow a bit and gives them that assurance that the person they've lost isn't just going anywhere and getting lost in the ether. They've got a direction and a place to go. And that gives them that affirmation that the person is going to have whatever experience after their life as a person is hopefully going to be good experience, because that's the strange thing. You might not necessarily believe in life after death, but we all want to, whatever your religious or cultural point of view, you all want to think that the spirit, whether it goes to heaven or back into the great beyond, is having a good experience. So it's like we know that they're not just dead and gone. We know there's a soul there. It just depends on where you want them or hope that they'll go, depending on your upbringing and cultural beliefs.
Right. And everybody's, especially in the Western world, we're inundated with, when somebody dies, we're worried, are they going to fly? Are they going to fry? What's going to happen there? I think the bottom line is everybody goes to heaven. And again, depending on, to your point, David, how are you raised? That's really hard for some people to jump over that hurdle of, well, but I was taught my whole life that if you do this, you're going to go to hell. Everybody goes to heaven. It's just been used throughout the ages to control the masses.
That's a whole other conversation.
Is fear, right? So, you better do this or you're going to, you're going to burn in hell for the rest of your life. Yeah. No, everybody goes to heaven.
Yes, no, that's so important for us to know. And again, yes, it creates this so much fear, and especially with this year, I can imagine with all the people who, you know, are passing over, people are probably like, oh my God, you know, where are they going to go? Are they going to go to hell, to heaven? And this has to stop. It has to stop. Yeah. So, which is good that we are talking about this now, so people can be informed and have this information. But David, what about you? When you've communicated with people's loved ones who've passed over, has anything ever stood out to you in terms of how they describe their death, or have they experienced anything that is kind of you know, a little bit different, or do they normally, you know, say, oh yes, I saw my angel guardian or a loved one on the other side? What's the typical kind of response that you've had?
It's normally just like very, as I said before, very literal. It's, this is what I look like. This is the situation I was in maybe at the time. And this is what I physically experienced. And a few times I've had situations where my brain has felt under the influence of something that's dulled my energy. And it's because the person was maybe having strong painkillers because they were in a pain, maybe if they had cancer or something like that. The morphine, they would give me the giddy feeling or the lightheadedness that they were experiencing at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
To portray to me that that's how they felt. And I've learned through experiencing that a couple of times that if I get that, then they are telling me that they were under the influence of medication, which again, I can tell to the person I'm giving the message to, which helps them understand I've got who I've got, because they'll know that that person may have been in that situation, and it helps them link that way. It's a little bit off topic, but with regards, one experience I had is I was asked to go to a friend's house because they had a spirit that was interacting with one of their children. And they wanted to be sure what it was because it was disconcerting to them. And we went to find where the spirit was so I could communicate with it, work out what was going on. And it actually came to me and like linked to my energy. So, and I was like, I knew that I needed to pass it on and get it, because it's a different thing we, you know, about how some spirits will go, but then they'll come back, or they'll stay stuck, or want to stay in this realm because they can get things from it. And basically, I've done this a couple of times. I've actually been shown how to open a portal to the other side to get that spirit to pass on. And this spirit did not want to leave. It wasn't a good person. It had bad intentions, and it knew that it wasn't going to. It may have been going to heaven, but it wasn't going to be treated, you know, nicely. It was going to have to face the consequences, basically. And I couldn't get rid of it, so because it wouldn't unstick from me. So I used a thing called dragon's blood, which is a plant sap that's turned into a powder, and that's a real good cleansing material. So I sprinkled some of that on top of myself. It unstuck the spirit, and basically I saw out of this void 2 grey angels come out. It's like 2 bouncers at a nightclub, kind of both put their hands on his shoulder and pull them in. And then once they were gone, I closed it off, and that was it. But that for me showed that, you know, there are angels. There aren't necessarily always the white heavenly light ones. So that, you know, there are kind of in between ones that are still on the good side, but they do the dirty work. So that was a really interesting experience for me too, because I knew the portal would work, but I didn't expect that to happen. And then once it was gone, you could feel the energy changed, and that was it. But
I mean, it works on so many levels, doesn't it? There's just so many different dimensions to it, and
and the guy whose house I was clearing, he was actually upstairs in his house when I was doing the work, and he said he could actually see what I saw. He saw it in his mind's eye, and he came down to me, and I told him what I'd seen. He goes, that's why I saw that, because he saw the same thing.
So he verified for you.
And so verified it, and it was just interesting that he saw what I saw, because he thought he was just going mad because it was such a bizarre image to have.
Yeah, and that's a whole another topic, which is
Yeah.
which we're
But you get my
actually
point.
discussing
It's
tomorrow.
yeah. It was interesting to see
Yeah.
how a spirit acts, not necessarily just through passing over, but the energy they can have after and the things that they can do as well, because they're not limited to a physical body. They can go different places.
I mean, it's kind of like Pandora's box, isn't it? It's like once you open it, there's just so many things that you to learn from this whole field altogether. And I think we're only kind of just really getting started in this. And yeah, there's definitely so much to learn. And I feel like the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. So yeah, there's still so much to go. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That was very interesting. And yeah, I know we're kind of almost running out of time. Well, we have run out of time and we've extended. But just to finish off, if you were to give advice, actually, what's one advice that you've received from Spirit that's kind of, always surprised you or has kind of stuck with you throughout your work? Is there anything that specifically stood out at one point that you remember? Julie? Is there anything that you kind of remember?
Yeah, back to the concept that our heads are big satellite dishes, and then we receive and we transmit frequencies. And when we get guidance from Spirit to do something, then we come back and we say, oh, I can't do that because, and we come up with 50 million different reasons why we can't do something. To just go back to, if it feels bad, that's your head. If it feels good or at least neutral, follow it. Take action. Take one step at a time. And a vision that's come through to me early on that I talk about a lot. I talk in analogies a lot to give our human minds a frame of reference for all this woo-woo stuff that we're talking about. And one analogy I like to use is we're all on the yellow brick road, like in the Wizard of Oz, and we're all wearing ruby shoes, either ruby slippers or ruby shoes, depending on what your preference is. You might, whatever. And Oz is heaven, it's our spirit's path, and we're all on the yellow brick road. And it only goes one way, it only goes forward. And each experience will step on a brick that lights up, and that's an experience. So we may step on a brick and it lands us in a field of blooming poppies, and it's a sunny day and it's pleasant. We may step on another brick that lands us in a haunted castle being chased by flying monkeys with a wicked witch flying around on a broom, and it's frighteningly, horrifying. But everything is just an experience, and we all are on this path. In the spirit world, there's no good or bad, there's no right or wrong, it's just an experience. So when we're in that wicked witch's castle and we realize it's just an experience, and we've got the ruby slippers on, and we see that pail of water over there in the corner, and we go get it and we throw it on the witch, then we realize she melts and she doesn't have any control over us, and we get back on the yellow brick road and we take another path, and we step on another brick on our path. So we all are on this life experience. Some things feel better than others. When something feels bad, again, that's our internal GPS system saying, hey, you're out of alignment with your spirit. Look at this from a different perspective. And when you do, then you feel better and you're able to move forward.
That's such good advice. Yes, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of people watching will contribute from this and will probably use it in their own life, which I definitely have. And David, what about you? Have you ever had any very wise advice from someone on the other side that they have that has always stuck with you?
I think it's more the experience of, like I said, the having to pass a message on. I've had situations where I've seen someone I've been aware there's a spirit with them that wants to tell them something, but it hasn't necessarily been a normal situation for me to be able to go up to someone and go, oh, by the way, this is what's happening. But I was in a restaurant, there was a guy sat there on his own, and I could see the wife spirit with him still, because I could tell that's what they go and do. And I was sat there and I was like, do I say anything? Do I not say anything? Am I going to upset him? And I was doing this all the time he was eating, and he literally went up to leave to go to the door. And I was like, I need to do this. I can't keep this information. And I went up to him and I told him what I needed to tell him. And I don't know if you've experienced it. Sometimes you'll know the person knows what you're talking about, but they'll just say something completely random because it's difficult for them to process it. But I could tell that he knew he was accepting of what I'd said. And then as soon as I'd done that, the energy dissipated and that was it.
Oh, wow. So you passed
And
on a message from a loved one that he...
yeah. And it's like I said, the amount of effort that spirit goes into to come and give that message or use you to give it, you kind of, I feel that you should respect them because they've made that attempt to use you as the vessel to do it, that unless it's really, really going to get you in trouble, if you get a message for someone, then don't hold back on giving it because that person needs to hear that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have bothered to make the effort in the first place to come to you to pass it on. So, yeah, it's more of, if a spirit does come to you, wants you to say something, it's probably better to do it because it's going to help that person that you're conveying it to. It may upset them because it may come out of the blue and they may not have, not even believe what you're doing. But once you've passed that message on, you've done your job, and then it's up to them to do what they want with it.
Yeah, they've obviously come to you for a reason. So
yeah,
yeah.
so respect it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. I agree with you, David, on that. I don't edit anything I get because I believe if I'm getting the information, I'm supposed to share it. And I think that that's important to do that as well. And we just don't know what somebody's going through. We don't know, again, what their frame of reference is. And I think it's important to remember that we're all spirits attached to a body, having a human experience. And at the end of the day, when people get afraid or get really worried when their loved one is dying, it's not only that they're worried for that person, but it's making us face our own mortality, knowing that we're going to be there one day, and knowing this information that we've shared in this past hour hopefully can help ease that and give you at least a glorious side of the equation that helps foster, relaxing with that and knowing it's inevitable, but it's also a glorious situation.
Yes, completely. I completely agree. And I think it's just beautiful that people are now starting to share a lot more their experiences, whether it's personal near-death experiences or, psychic mediums like you guys, sharing your work with so many people and allowing people to come to you and to ask to communicate with their loved ones. I think it's so beautiful to do that. And I know personally in my own life, it's helped me so much, just knowing that my loved ones who've passed away are still there and they're fine and they're looking after us in a way as well. So I think we should definitely continue this work. And with that, thank you both so much for joining me. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you both again here. It's been just so much wisdom shared and so much information. And I hope people can, again, share this video and share it with anyone that you think might contribute from this information. David, they can find, if people wanted to get in touch with you, they can find you on your Facebook group, which is do.holistic.
Yep.
And that's the main way.
Yes, please.
And also, Julie, if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, they can visit your website, www.askjulieryan.com. So, which is also, all the information is below in the description. So if you guys wanted to check it out, definitely do so. And otherwise, until tomorrow, I'll be having my last set of interviews from the Life After Death Summit. So I hope everyone can join me again for those. And I think it'll be an amazing way to end this whole summit and weekend. And that's really it. Thank you both so much again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
We can do this
Happy
again.
holidays, everybody.
And to you.